Hello folks, my name is Mark and this is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So this is a video about white privilege. It's something that's been in the news a lot, you know. It's in the air, people are talking about it on the internet and stuff, especially since the Black Lives Matter movement became a thing. And when I hear people talking about it, what I get back from white people is they don't believe it exists, right? And I can understand why. So the idea is that, well, white privilege is the idea that society is set up in such a way that it gives white people advantages that other, people, minorities and stuff don't have, right? And I can understand why a white person in America today wouldn't believe that it exists, because most people in the country are not rich, okay? Most people, most white people in the country are not rich. They're either upper to lower middle class, right? And they've spent their lives working like everybody else has. They've gone to school, they work their ass off to get a degree or whatever. They go out, they get a job, they work their ass off every single day at the job, right? They see, they're stuck in the same drudgery that everybody else is. Get up, work your ass off, come home, deal with people's bullshit. And then they go and they hear somebody say that they're privileged, and they go, well, I'm not fucking privileged, like I earned what I have just like everybody else. And you're like, you're just lazy or whatever, and that's why you can't achieve stuff, right? And I can totally understand that, living, the way that the country is, right? Because we basically live in a society where everybody profits off of screwing each other. That's our society, but that's for another video. The problem is that it definitely does exist. White privilege is definitely a thing that exists, but it's a lot more subtle than that. It's not like you're born, and they go, oh, that baby's white, and then they give you a free pass to do shit. You know what I mean? Or it's not like you walk into a store and the manager goes, that's a white person, go give him special help, and then you have like an attendance and shit following you, or like a cop is going to be like, oh, hey, I was going to arrest you, but I find that you're white, so I'm going to let you go. It's not like that, okay? It's not blatant and in your face. And it's not so much a privilege, as it is that minorities have disadvantages, which white people just don't have. So I guess you can look at it that way, right? And, well, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, one of the things that black people and minorities and Latinos have is they seem to have to prove themselves more than, white people do, right? So, for example, right, you have this notion that, and black people are a victim of this a lot, this idea that they don't earn what they have, So, for example, one of the very popular attacks against Obama when he was running for president was that they wanted to see his school record. There was a call to see his school records, right? To see his university records, right? And why? Why would they ask that? Because the implication was that he didn't earn his degree. That he went to school and he got shitty grades and they gave it to him anyway as some kind of like affirmative action thing, right? And this is shit that you hear all the time from the right wing. Well, this guy didn't earn it, or he's getting a free ride. Minorities get a free ride. We give them, affirmative action and stuff like that. We're hiring people that don't deserve their positions, right? And it seems like, well, so a black person, a Latino person, and even Asian people, to a lesser extent, I'd say, have to work there. They seem to have to work twice as hard to get the exact same thing, That's the thing. That's the idea. Like, that's one of the privileges, at least that I can think of. Is that white people don't have to work. They don't have to prove themselves constantly. They don't have to work twice as hard. Because it seems like that's something that minorities face a lot. And this is probably pretty prevalent. I mean, from what I hear, you'll get a guy that's a black guy, Latino guy. They'll work really hard to try to get into college. And people think, well, he didn't earn his degree, like he didn't get it, like he got in there as part of some kind of like affirmative action program or whatever, right? And then they'll go and they'll work really hard to get like a job, right? And then people will think that they don't do their job well, that they only got their job because of some quota fucking program, right? And then, they'll save up really hard and they'll try to buy a house somewhere, and they won't be able to. People won't sell them a house in certain neighborhoods, right? Because the fucking property value will go down just because they're black, you know. Not be, I mean, that shit happened. I mean, that was like really prevalent back in the, you know, 50s and 60s and 70s. Like, if you would move to an area that, you know, all the white people would move away because the property value would go down instantly because you were a minority. You know, not because you were a criminal, not because you did anything, just because of who you were, right? So a lot of places in the past, like, black people wouldn't be able to move to certain places. They just wouldn't be able to buy a house, you know. And a lot of people don't know this either, but in the past it was really hard for minorities to get bank accounts, you know, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and even up into the 80s, you know. It was really tough for them to even get a bank account. Like, it would go and for some reason the criteria would be tougher and they would just get refused, and certain, there used to be like black only banks that would, you know, blanks that would serve only black people, you know. Like, how are you gonna like save up money if you can't get a job, right? If you're living in a shitty neighborhood because, you know, you can't move, you know, and nobody fucking believes that you earned what you fucking have, right? And every place you go, you know, all the menial jobs are being held by minorities, you know. That's another thing, right? Because, you know, it's hard to get a good job when you're a minority, but it's really easy to get a shitty job. Nobody seems to care when you're like, you know, when you apply for a job that involves wearing a paper hat or, you know, making French fries or some shit like that. I mean, it's, you know, just go to pretty much any major American city and look at the restaurants and, you know, look who the janitor staffs are, you know, look who and you'll see that they're pretty much like, they're almost always minorities, you know, they're either black or Latino everywhere you go. I mean, I think in my entire life, I've seen maybe one white fry cook in my entire life. Like, usually if there's a white guy working in a restaurant in the back, he's either the manager or he owns the place. Okay. There's, you know, or he'll be a waiter or some shit like that. Like, you know, all the fry cooks, all the bus boys, all the fucking, you know, all the janitors, all the landscaper guys and gardeners and stuff, they're always minorities. And it's like, well, why is that? You know, how come, you know, like, here's an example. Like, I work for a Fortune 500 company, actually, right? I'm not going to tell you where I work or what I do, but, you know, we make software, right? And in my entire office, there's maybe 2 black people in the entire office, right? There's plenty of Indians, like guys from India who come here on work visas, right? They import labor from India because they need it, you know. There's plenty of white people. Why are there only 2 black people in my entire fucking place, you know? But if I go to the restaurant, you know, or there's maybe like half a dozen, you know, I'd say maybe, you know, the company that I work for has about 300 people, and there's maybe about 60 Latinos, right? That's actually a much better ratio, right? But how come, like, every single, like, restaurant, like, if I go to the restaurant down the street, the entire staff will be Latino? Like, why is that, you know? It's because, you know, and how, like, no white people work there. Like, why? You know, it's because that's how society, you know, it's fucking white privilege. That's what it is, man. You know? It's much easier for, I mean, seriously, like, it's easier for white people to get jobs than Latinos and black people. Like, for example, you know, there's studies that, you know, I'll put some links in the little thing. If a black person and a white person go and they have the exact same credentials and they go to get a job, right, it's like overwhelmingly the white person gets hired. Like, just not even, like, you know, it's not even close. In fact, there was another study I saw where just looking at resumes, if the name looks black, you know, if the name sounds like a black person, they're most likely won't get a callback. And that's just, you know, why is that? Is it because what? You know, is it because racism, you know, institutional racism? Is it just a society thing? Is it, you know, how do you explain it? You know, well, I can explain it. White privilege. If you're a white person, and chances are you've probably never even noticed that this is even something that happens, you know, because you don't, you know, it's not in your face. You don't live with it. It doesn't confront you. I mean, I've been relatively lucky that I've, you know, gone my whole life and have, you know, experienced, you know, very little racism, although it seemed to be more when I was younger, right? And nowadays it's not even, you know, it doesn't really happen as much. I was a lot more darker skinned when I was a kid. That's something that a lot of Asian people tell me actually that happens to them, as they. But it's like, that's the thing, is that you're not going to see it, unless you're looking, unless you know what you're looking for, unless you actually like try to pay attention to, these things. It's not something that you're confronted with on a daily basis, like like minorities are. So, when you hear somebody say that white privilege doesn't exist, you're all just, you're lazy. Like, that's not true. It's not true at all. I mean, I'm not gonna be one of these guys that tries, I'm not gonna defend the bad things that minorities do, like that you hear a lot of shit about crime statistics and stuff like that, and I'm not gonna try to defend that shit, but I am saying that there are privileges. If you're white in this country, you do have a privilege. You are you have things easier, and that's just how do we make it so that everybody has the same privileges is what that's what the question's all about. So adios, folks.